Hey there, fellow dreamers. Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters, where I share stories of extraordinary experiences that might just help you drift off to sleep. But first, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Out on the lost coast of Northern California, I was hiking alone one early October afternoon. The ocean fog was just starting to creep across the hills, and the trails were slick from a morning drizzle. The air hung heavy with a damp, salty smell. I'd been walking for hours, enjoying the complete solitude. About halfway through a cliffside loop trail, I paused in one of those rare clearings where you can see the vast ocean stretching out below. As I caught my breath and checked my phone, something extraordinary happened. A blinding white light flashed across the sky, right over the water. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. No thunder, no sound, just this intense, car-sized camera flash that illuminated everything for a split second. I scanned the horizon, expecting to see a boat or lighthouse, but nothing was there. The sky remained mostly cloudy. The whole experience felt wrong, completely disconnected from any natural phenomenon I knew. When I checked my phone to note the time, something even stranger occurred. The clock read 4:18 p.m., which didn't make sense. I was certain I'd checked the time just minutes before, and it had been around 4 p.m. My watch showed the exact same time. With no cell signal to sync the time, I was relying on what should have been a reliable internal clock. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The flash was too bright, too sudden, and now time itself seemed to be playing tricks on me. Something was definitely not right. The hike had left me unsettled. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Retracing my steps in my mind, I recalled the routine moments, stopping at a fallen log to tie my boot, checking the map on my phone, taking a few sips from my water bottle. Yet the timeline seemed strange. Somehow, I had lost about 18 minutes that I couldn't account for. When I got back to my car, about an hour later, I called my girlfriend, hoping for understanding or insight. Her response was dismissive. "You got lost in the woods and lost track of time. That's all," she said with a laugh. "It happens to everyone." Her explanation sounded logical, but something deeper nagged at me. That night, I obsessively checked my phone clock. It remained stubbornly 18 minutes ahead of my watch, which I had carefully reset in town. Even more peculiar, the photos from my hike bore timestamps matching the incorrect time, 4:18 p.m. and later. Seeking answers, I scoured hiking forums, looking for any similar experiences or explanations. Nothing. No reports of strange phenomena, no mentions of unusual events in the area. No storms, no satellites, no aircraft, just my inexplicable time anomaly. The next day I returned to the same location. The landscape had transformed. Thick fog shrouded the cliffs, making them appear more ominous under the gray sky. An eerie silence enveloped the area. No animals stirred, no birds chirped. I felt watched, though nothing moved. My phone's clock remained unchanged, still 18 minutes fast. Network time sync failed due to no signal. I scanned the sky, half expecting the mysterious flash to reappear, but nothing happened. Weeks have passed, and the clock issue persists. I've reset it multiple times, even performed a factory restore. Nothing works. It's always 18 minutes ahead. People dismiss my experience, telling me I simply lost track of time or that my mind played tricks. But I know what I saw: a bright, silent flash with no explanation and a clock that refuses to align with reality. I'm still searching for answers, still wondering about those missing minutes and that unexplained moment of light. Summer, I was volunteering at the Marblehead Lighthouse during the night shift. I'd been helping out on weekends for a couple of years, and that week I'd picked up extra hours. The lighthouse stands alone, a tall white tower on a rocky point jutting into Lake Erie, with the town about a mile inland. Nights were usually quiet, just wind and waves. My job was straightforward: keep the light running, log foghorn sounds if needed, and watch for boats in distress. Most of the time, it was pretty boring, but I enjoyed the solitude. My border collie, Nell, was great company. She'd sit at the tower's base or walk the path while I checked lamps and recorded weather conditions. The fog typically rolled in around 2 or 3 a.m., thick enough to swallow the shoreline. But this night was different: clear, cold, and sharp. Just past midnight, something felt off during my usual outdoor rounds. The lighthouse beam rotated steadily, cutting through darkness and catching waves in quick flashes. That's when I saw it, just beyond the waterline, maybe 300 yards from shore. Initially, I thought it was a fishing boat or buoy, but when the lighthouse beam passed over it, nothing changed. No lights, no movement. It just hung there, perfectly still above the water. I squinted, my breath fogging in the cold air. The object was dark against the lake's faint shimmer. No blinking lights, no engine sounds, just a flat, roundish shadow. It didn't rock with waves or shift with wind. Nell growled softly, tugging her leash. When I looked down, she wasn't terrified, just more alert than usual. I tried to dismiss the strange feeling. Maybe it was a light trick or an unusual cloud bank caught by the beam. Grabbing my binoculars, I raised them, but the object didn't become clearer. If anything, it seemed to absorb the light. The beam swept over it again, and I noticed something bizarre. The water directly underneath was completely still, as if waves stopped at its base. None of it made sense. I started walking down the rocky path toward the water, Nell in tow, about those missing minutes that something happened during them that I can't remember. The night was quiet, just the wind and Nell's soft panting breaking the silence. I stood at the edge of the rocks, staring out over the water where something inexplicable had just been. My watch read 12:17 a.m., and the lighthouse beam had just swept away, revealing a fishing boat in the distance before returning to find nothing where the mysterious object had been moments before. Nell's tail was stiff, her attention locked on the spot. I tried capturing a picture with my phone, but the screen showed only darkness. No matter how I tapped or adjusted, the camera refused to focus on what I knew I had seen. Days later, a local fisherman mentioned a similar experience, a weird shadow on the water around midnight that didn't move and vanished with the fog. I kept the details of the lighthouse beam to myself, but the encounter stayed with me. Since that night, I've checked that stretch of water during every shift. I never saw the object again, but sometimes, when the beam sweeps across the lake on a still night, I catch a fleeting flicker, like something is waiting, watching. My job as a night security guard at a corporate campus outside Spokane wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The building emptied after 7 p.m., and the parking lots remained mostly silent, except for occasional maintenance crews. Outdoor cameras monitored the entrances and some pointed skyward, though I'd never given them much thought. About 2 weeks into the job, I started noticing something odd about those cameras. Every night, precisely at 3:41 a.m., something strange would occur. Every night at 3:41 a.m., something strange happened with the cameras pointing skyward. The video feeds would completely black out for precisely 17s econs before returning to normal. No static, no fuzz, just pure darkness. This wasn't happening on any other cameras, only the ones facing up. At first, I thought it might be a technical issue, maybe overheating equipment or faulty wiring, but the precision was unnerving. It was so consistent, like a perfectly timed mechanism. I tried talking to the day shift guards, but they either didn't care or hadn't noticed. When I mentioned it to a tech guy, he assured me the cameras were new, state-of-the-art models, not prone to glitches. That only made me more curious. So I started a nightly ritual. At 3:40, I'd sit in the security office, coffee in hand, watching the outdoor sky-facing monitors. My phone's digital clock would tick closer to 3:41, and right on cue, the screens would cut to black. No sound, no other changes, just a complete blackout of light above. One warm August night, something different caught my attention. As the glitch hit, I glimpsed a pale glow through the window, hovering just above the distant tree line. When I turned to look, it vanished. The camera feeds returned to normal, showing nothing unusual, just empty parking lots and a dark sky. The next evening, I decided to get closer to the source. I stationed myself on the back loading dock near one of the upward-facing cameras. Nell, my dog, paced quietly beside me. I had my phone's flashlight and a thermos of coffee, determined to catch whatever was causing these strange interruptions. Just before 3:40, the air suddenly grew cold, as if something had sucked away all the warmth. Nell stiffened, her ears twitching, staring intently upward. Then, right on schedule, the camera's blinking light went out for exactly 17 seconds. The pale glow haunted me night after night. At precisely 3:41, the upward cameras would glitch for exactly 17 seconds, revealing something strange. Sometimes the soft, steady orb hovered just beyond the tree line, other times floating above the parking lot, always silent, always still. My boss dismissed my concerns, telling me to focus on real security issues instead of chasing shadows. But I knew something was different. When I reviewed the footage carefully, slowing down the video around the glitch time, I noticed subtle changes. The blackout wasn't just black. It was a dark, grainy static reminiscent of old VHS tape noise, with faint horizontal lines. During these moments, barely visible shadows would flicker in the background. They weren't distinct shapes, just vague forms shifting softly, yet their movement felt deliberate and unsettling. Nell, my dog, sensed something too. She would growl low and move closer to me, her instincts on high alert. I started feeling constantly watched. Even during daylight hours, I found myself glancing nervously at windows and treetops more frequently. One evening after my shift, Nell tugged hard on her leash toward the tree line. There it was again, the faint, distant glow. This time, it felt like it was waiting for something. I didn't wait around. We rushed to the car, windows up despite the heat. During the drive home, I repeatedly checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but empty road. Yet for weeks afterward, a soft humming followed me during nighttime hours, a persistent reminder of something unexplained. The camera feed showed nothing unusual. When I checked my phone, the glitch had cleared and everything looked normal. But I knew what I'd seen. Those 17 seconds of static and that pale, motionless orb were burned into my memory, a mystery that defied explanation. The cameras never caught a clear image. Shadowy shapes during the blackout were always just out of focus, impossible to identify. Those nights still haunt me. The quiet glitches, the silent glow, the shadows flickering just beyond the edge of the feed. A low vibration from machinery or wind through power lines would sometimes occur, stopping when I went inside. No one else reported hearing it. I never figured out what caused these strange occurrences. Sometimes I wonder if it was some kind of interference or a system glitch, but I can't explain the glow or how Nell reacted. The clock was never off. These glitches hit exactly at 3:41 a.m. every single night without fail. I kept working there for a few more months, eventually stopping my attempts to watch the cameras at that specific time. The glow never showed up when I wasn't paying attention. They eventually replaced the cameras, citing hardware issues, but I remember those moments clearly. I don't know what it was. I just know it was there. My solo camping trips had never been like this before. I typically choose remote locations away from busy trails, preferring solitude. That weekend, I headed to a little-known section of the Cascade Range in Washington, a spot I'd visited once before and loved for its quiet isolation. The weather forecast promised cool, dry conditions with maybe a few clouds. I arrived mid-afternoon on a Friday, carrying my pack and my rescue dog, Wren. She's a calm companion, perfect for these trips. Near a small clearing, surrounded by firs and cedars, with a creek babbling downhill, I set up camp. I spread out my gear on a flat patch and ensured Wren had water and a resting spot. The first night seemed completely normal. I cooked dinner on my camp stove, read by flashlight, and settled in early. Wren curled up at my feet, and the forest hummed with its usual sounds. Chirping insects, wind rustling through trees, the creek's steady murmur. Suddenly, I woke in the middle of the night. Not from any specific noise, but from an inexplicable feeling of being watched, something not entirely unusual in these wilderness spaces. I scanned the area with my headlamp, seeing only shadows and trees. Wren remained peacefully asleep beside me, her soft breathing the only sound breaking the night's silence. I lifted the tent flap for some air and stopped cold. My gear was still there, but not how I'd left it. Every single item, backpack, boots, cooler, water bottles, even Wren's leash and bowl, was arranged in a perfect circle around the tent. Each piece pointed precisely inward, like some deliberate setup. I blinked, wondering if I was dreaming or had sleepwalked. My tent remained exactly where I'd set it, stakes firmly in the ground, sleeping bag untouched. Wren stood at the circle's edge, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. I checked my phone. 3 a.m. No missed calls or texts. Not that signal mattered out here. No sounds had woken me during the night. No footsteps. No voices. I carefully walked the circle's perimeter, searching for any trace of who might have done this. The ground was soft in places, but only our footprints remained. Nothing else disturbed. Uneasy, I packed everything back into the tent and scanned the surroundings, the tree line, the creek, the path I'd taken. No sign of anyone. But something felt off. The morning hike didn't calm my nerves. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and Wren stuck unusually close. She didn't bark or growl, just seemed unsettled. As the day progressed, the weather turned. A cool mist settled over the forest, making everything feel heavier and quieter. Strange sounds emerged, faint branch snappings, movements just beyond my vision. But each time I looked, nothing was there. The light seemed strange too. Some forest patches looked too bright or too dark, colors slightly wrong. My compass went haywire, its needle swinging wildly before settling, then spinning again with slight movement. At one point, I thought I saw a figure between two trees, maybe 100 yards ahead. I called out softly, but it vanished instantly. Had I imagined it? That night, I camped in a different clearing miles away. I tried convincing myself I was just tired and jumpy. But deep down, I knew something unusual had happened. We were hiking the Coyote Gulch Loop in Grand Staircase Escalante over the long weekend, my girlfriend Elise and I. It was our third time doing this trail, but the first in early spring. Nights were chilly but manageable, and the days were perfect. Clear skies, mid-60s, and dry. We barely saw another soul, which was exactly why we chose this route. Our gear was standard, a 2-person tent, freeze-dried meals, iodine tablets for water, and my old Canon camera that I always bring on trips like these. We started Friday morning, planning to be out by Sunday night. Something felt off from the beginning. Wren, our dog, seemed more restless than usual, almost pushing me to keep moving. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I headed back toward my car along the trail we'd come in on. Thick mist hung around, and the trees seemed endless. At one point, I noticed my pack felt lighter. Stopping to check, I realized a couple of things were missing: my map and a small pocket knife. I was certain I'd had both the night before. A quick backtrack turned up nothing. That's when I saw it again, the circle. This time, it wasn't around a tent, but on the forest floor. A near-perfect ring about 10 feet across, made of sticks, stones, and pine cones. A patch of recently disturbed dirt sat in the center. Wren stopped and refused to come closer. I stared at the circle for a long time, feeling that same cold tightness from the first morning. I didn't touch anything, just left. Back at the parking lot, I checked my phone. The signal had returned, but something was wrong. All my messages and emails were gone, as if the phone had reset overnight. Even stranger, the photos from the last 2 days had vanished, except for one blurry shot of the circle on the ground. I'm not sure what any of it means. No one else was out there. No tracks, no signs of anyone passing through. Just those circles, one with all my gear, the other made from sticks and stones, and the way Wren acted like she knew something I didn't. I've camped since, but never alone in that part of the forest. Sometimes I still get this weird feeling like I'm being watched, or the trees are waiting for something. I don't know if someone else was out there, or if it was something else entirely. All I know is that when I woke up that first morning, the circle was real. Everything was rearranged perfectly, and nothing about it made any sense. We were hiking through the canyon, me and Elise, just capturing moments for memories. The first day was pretty standard. We made our way down through a narrow crack in the wall and set up camp near the Escalante River, close to Jacob Hamlin Arch. The night was mild enough that we left the tents fly off, and the moonlight was incredible. Stars filled the sky as we listened to the river and watched satellites drift overhead. Elise spotted what looked like a weird, wobbling satellite, but it turned out to be a plane banking sharply, blinking red and white. The second day took an unexpected turn. We were a few miles past the arch, heading toward Hurricane Wash. Around 3 p.m., we stopped for a late lunch in a wide-open section of the canyon. Towering sandstone walls rose about 80 feet on both sides. The sun was starting to dip, casting a golden stripe across the opposite wall. It was breathtaking. We sat in the shade, making peanut butter tortillas and sharing water. I was relaxing with my hat over my face when Elise's voice broke the silence. "Do you see that?" Looking up, I followed her gaze to the canyon wall. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed it, a subtle ripple, a shimmer in the air. It wasn't quite light, more like the distorted effect of heat on summer pavement. But this was different. The distortion moved slowly from left to right along the rock face, completely level and too early in the year to be heat. We stood up, watching this strange phenomenon. It stretched about 30 feet wide, with no clear edges, just a glassy, warping effect like looking through water. The distortion shifted depending on what was behind it, bending and twisting cracks and shadows as if pulled through a lens. We were speechless, transfixed by its smooth, silent movement. Suddenly it stopped, just froze against the rock, motionless with no fade or flicker. I stepped forward, reaching for my camera. I zoomed in and tried to take a picture, but something was wrong. The camera clicked, but the screen remained black. I checked the battery, full. I tried again, but got the same result. I switched the camera to video mode, expecting to capture something, but when I played back the footage, all I saw was a solid gray frame. No image at all. I checked the lens, it was clean. I tried turning the camera off and on, but nothing changed. While I was fiddling with the device, Elise whispered, "It's changing." I looked up. The shimmer was drifting back the way it came, but slower this time. It left a slight warping trail behind it, almost like dragging saran wrap through water. Suddenly, it pulled away from the rock, moving straight out into open air. As it moved, the distortion became less noticeable. Within seconds, it vanished completely. No sound, no flash, just empty space. We stood frozen. My mouth felt dry, but I couldn't bring myself to reach for water. Elise grabbed my hand without looking at me. We remained still until the canyon returned to normal. Bugs buzzing, wind rustling through brush, sunlight shifting across the walls. We continued hiking, but something felt different. The air seemed to have weight to it. We barely spoke for the next few hours. That night, we camped near a dry creek bed close to the exit trail leading back to our car. We didn't set up the tent fly, just laid in our sleeping bags under the stars. Around midnight, Elise woke me up. She wasn't panicked, just tense. "Do you hear that?" she asked. At first, I heard nothing. Then I caught it, a soft, irregular clicking sound that wasn't natural, not like insects. It echoed from somewhere behind us up the canyon, making it hard to pinpoint. We sat up, put on our jackets, and switched off our headlamps. The clicking would start, stop, then start again. Sometimes it sounded closer, sometimes farther, always coming from behind. After about 10 minutes, it stopped completely. We waited another half hour in silence. Nothing. We eventually laid back down, but sleep was elusive. The next morning, we packed up quickly. Normally, we'd sit, have coffee, stretch, and enjoy the view. Not this time. We hiked hard and barely talked, reaching the car by noon. Elise, unusually, double-checked the back seat before we got in. Back home, I plugged the camera into my laptop. The files were there, 5 or 6 from where the shimmer was, but every single one was corrupted, showing only a gray screen. I was flying my 1979 Piper Archer back from Fallon to Bend, just me and Tuck, my healer mix who hates flying. It was a cold, clear January day with that dry Nevada winter haze, bright but dusty. I'd left just before noon, not in any rush to get home before dark. Tuck was curled up in the passenger seat like he was being punished, and I was keeping things smooth and quiet for him. About 40 minutes into the flight, cruising at 7,500 feet with autopilot on, just past the Black Rock Desert, something caught my eye at my 10 low on the horizon. At first, I thought it was glare from the sun, maybe reflecting off a distant plane. But this light wasn't moving or pulsing. It just sat there. I adjusted the yoke to get a better look. The object was maybe a mile out, slightly lower than me. Hard to judge distance in the air. It looked like a dull silver O, our gray ball bearing, hanging motionless. No wings, no tail, no exhaust trail. I blinked a few times, checked the GPS to confirm I wasn't near restricted airspace, and called out on common traffic advisory. Nothing came back. I tried again. Still silence. Tuck had raised his head by now, staring out the side window with his ears slightly back. Not growling, just watching. Then the thing moved. Not quickly at first. It slid across the air toward me, smooth and even, like it was on a track. It closed about half the distance, maybe half a mile out now, and stopped. Perfectly still again. Same altitude. This whole experience reminded me of something that happened with Elise. We'd found an SD card with video files that were completely unreadable, just static and weird blocks. Her media restoration buddy couldn't make sense of it. The files existed in the metadata, but they were hollow, with no thumbnails or previews. Elise doesn't like talking about it. The clicking sound is what haunts her most. We still hike together, but not in that place anymore. She won't go anywhere without tree cover now, feeling exposed in open spaces. I understand why. I was flying a routine route with Tuck, my dog, when something unusual happened. We were cruising at altitude when I noticed an object without any visible means of propulsion, just floating silently beside me. I took the plane off autopilot, my hands trembling slightly. On the emergency frequency, I made a radio call, Piper 29er45 Echo. I was trying to get confirmation about an unidentified object matching my altitude, heading north. No response came from CDF. Then the radio squelched, a faint burst of static. No voice, no identifiers. Tuck stood up in the seat, not barking, just standing still with his tail down. The object shifted, moving to my 10 and then paralleling me at my 9, matching my speed and altitude. For over a minute, it paced me. I kept the controls steady, not touching the yoke. Everything felt normal, no turbulence, no static interference. Something told me changing course would be unwise. As it drew closer, I could see details. The surface was smooth, almost polished, but not reflective like chrome, more like brushed metal. No seams, no markings. It hovered, locked in step with me, not spinning. The radio clicked again, a single garbled word, maybe 2 syllables. It didn't sound like English or even human. Then the object tilted slightly, almost like a nod. Moments later, it made an impossible turn, sharp, with no curve, no bank. It shot up and east at a 45-degree angle, vanishing in under 2 seconds. Instantly, the radio returned to normal. I heard chatter from a Cessna near Winnemucca. Tuck curled back down, shaking. I landed in Bend and said nothing. I logged the flight like any other. Later, I checked ADS-B logs. Nothing showed up in that airspace. No traffic. Just me, Tuck, and that unexplained object. We were out behind Laney's cabin near the old quarry road, watching the Percades, when I first told someone about what happened. Hot August nights, where the air clings to your skin and crickets chirp endlessly. We gathered around 10, me, Laney, her brother Craig, and my friend Micah. 4 fold-out chairs formed a circle around a beat-up cooler filled with cheap beer. Pepper, Laney's golden retriever, wove between us, panting as if trying to cool the entire county. No moon hung overhead, creating perfect conditions for stargazing. Far from town, the tree line blended into a black smear against the sky. The Milky Way stretched out brilliantly, brighter than I'd ever seen. Around 10:45, the first meteor streaked across the sky, west to east, and we cheered like excited kids. This pattern continued for about an hour. Quiet moments, punctuated by sudden bright streaks, with someone always nudging their neighbor in excitement. Close to midnight, something changed. Leaning back with a sore neck, I noticed a meteor behaving differently. Instead of zipping across the sky, this one descended slowly, almost gracefully. Glowing white with a faint greenish tail, it moved unlike any meteor I'd witnessed. Space junk, I initially thought, but even satellite debris would have traveled faster. "Hey, check that out near Cassiopeia," I called. Craig whistled low. "That's not right." The object continued its unusual descent at a slight angle, gliding rather than falling. It didn't flicker like typical meteors, but held a steady glow. Suddenly it stopped, completely motionless, hovering around 30 or 40 degrees above the horizon. Absolute silence fell. Even Pepper froze, ears perked, tail rigid. "It's not moving," Laney finally said. "Nope," Micah responded, his telescope forgotten. "Meteors don't stop." We watched the bright, round, with colorless object hanging suspended. As I fumbled to open my phone's camera, it began to dim, not like a sudden blink, but as if a dimmer switch was slowly turning down. Within moments, it vanished completely. A full minute of silence followed. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Then Pepper erupted into sharp, sudden barks, racing to the clearing's edge. She stopped at the tree line, hackles raised, staring intently into the darkness. The night started normal enough. We were out watching for meteors, our usual spot near the woods. Suddenly, something caught our attention, a light that didn't seem quite right. Craig thought maybe it landed, but Laney disagreed. She said it just quit. Pepper's behavior changed immediately. Her tail low and twitching, she wasn't her usual playful self. She circled a specific spot near the woods, as if trying to track a vanishing scent. Micah pulled out his scope, aiming where the light had been, but saw nothing, just stars and darkness. Our watching became uneasy. Every streak of light made us jump. Craig muttered about seeing more, which put everyone on edge, though it turned out to be just a regular meteor burning out. Around 1 a.m., an unexpected wind burst through. Not a gentle breeze, but a sudden gust like a massive fan had switched on. It lasted barely a second, but kicked up dust and made the trees creak. Pepper's reaction was immediate. She bolted back toward the cabin without waiting for us. We packed up shortly after. Lainey folded her chair silently and started walking. Craig and I grabbed the cooler while Micah lingered, scanning the sky as if expecting something more. Back at the cabin, Pepper was unusually skittish. She curled up under the porch, something she never does, and spent the entire night staring into the trees, refusing to come inside or drink water. We tried to joke and lighten the mood, but no one was really laughing. Craig kept checking the windows with a flashlight, seemingly expecting to see someone outside. Sometime around 3 a.m., we all fell asleep in the living room with the TV playing softly. When I woke up, the power was out. Clocks were blinking, and the fridge was warm. Around 8:30, power returned, and my phone buzzed with weather alerts about sudden pressure drops in the area. Lainey made coffee in silence. Micah packed his gear without making eye contact. Craig and I watched Pepper finally emerge from under the porch. She sniffed the air, looked toward the trees, and walked to the exact spot she had barked at the night before. She stood watching for a long time. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. We haven't returned during meteor season since. December was cold and quiet. Muzzleloader season was in full swing, with snow falling intermittently and temperatures hovering around 18 degrees. I'd set up in a pop-up blind about 200 yards off an old logging trail, with a clear shot lane between two ridges. While I'd seen some decent bucks on the trail cam, I was really out here for the silence, no phone service, no traffic, just snow and trees. After legal hunting hours, I pulled out my thermal monocular and Gen 2 night vision goggles. I wasn't trying to poach, just curious about nighttime wildlife movement. I'd spotted owls before and deer hidden in snow, invisible to the naked eye. Around 8:30 that night, I first noticed small heat signatures on the thermal. Looked like porcupines waddling around. While adjusting the night vision focus, something much larger emerged from the tree line, about 70 yards out. Initially, I thought it was a person, tall, upright, moving slowly, but something was off. Its movement was unnaturally smooth, almost gliding without the typical up and down walking motion. As I adjusted the goggles, the figure remained clear. Then another appeared, followed by a third. All were tall, well over 6 feet, and incredibly thin. They moved silently through the trees, spaced about 10 feet apart. No flashlights, no gear, no conversation. Switching back to thermal, their heat signatures were bizarre. Bright white, consistent with human body heat, but too uniform. No heat variations from hands or face, just solid forms. Stranger still, the snow beneath them didn't melt or get disturbed. For a minute or two, I watched them completely motionless, my breathing shallow and heart racing. These weren't deer, bears, or hunters. No orange clothing, no lights, no sound. Suddenly, all three stopped mid-step, as if waiting, perfectly synchronized, perfectly still. The first sign something was off came when they turned. Not just their heads, but their entire bodies swiveled in my direction. I killed the thermal, and darkness swallowed everything. Trees and snow glimmered in the moonlight. When I lifted the night vision goggles again, they were still facing me, motionless. I couldn't explain how, but it felt like they were staring directly at me, even though I couldn't make out any features or faces. One of them took a single step forward. Then, in perfect synchronization, all three shifted and began walking diagonally uphill toward the ridge. Their movement was eerily silent. No sound, no disturbance, not in the snow, not on the ground. They moved with an unsettling familiarity, like they knew exactly how to navigate the darkness. I waited until they vanished behind the ridge. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. Without hesitation, I packed up, folding the blind, clipping it to my pack and heading back to the truck with my light off. Every minute or so, I'd check behind me. Near the low marsh, I caught another thermal signature. It flickered briefly and disappeared. Could have been a bird, could have been heat bouncing off ice, but it looked just like the others. When I reached the truck, Tuck was in the back seat. He usually stayed in the cab with the windows cracked. But this time, he whined, a low, unusual sound with his tail tucked. He kept looking out the rear window as we drove down the old trail. Back at Owen's place, I said nothing except that the woods were quiet. He didn't ask further. The next day, I returned to where the blind had been. Fresh snow covered the ground. My own prints were visible, but nothing else. No tracks near the funnel, no sign of movement. I walked up the ridge where they had gone. Nothing, just snow, trees, and silence. It was late one night, driving on Highway 95 between Dry Creek and Pineville, when the memory returned. I was driving through northern Idaho late one night in mid-October, the storm raging around me. My truck groaned against the heavy winds, and a cold drizzle pelted the windshield. After weeks of overtime at the mill, I was exhausted and eager to get home to Juneau, my brindle pit bull waiting in the back seat. The nearly empty roads suited me just fine. My dash cam was running, and the GPS was hooked up, standard precautions I never thought much about. About 15 minutes into the drive, near an old, long-closed rest stop, something caught my eye through the rain-streaked glass. A bright light hung motionless just off the highway, maybe 50 yards into the trees. It wasn't like a typical flashlight or flare. This light was different, a white, glowing orb that remained completely still despite the wind violently shaking the surrounding trees. I slowed down, watching intently. The trees creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, but this light didn't budge. Curious, I hit the dash cam's remote to zoom in. That's when I noticed something stranger. The light was pulsing. Not a random flicker, but a deliberate, rhythmic brightening and dimming. Nothing about the scene made sense. The abandoned rest stop was fenced off, with no paths leading to where the light hovered. I half expected it to be a drone or emergency signal, but nothing explained its unnatural stillness. Was I imagining things, or was the storm playing tricks? For at least 2 miles, the light followed me, fixed in the woods beside the road. I couldn't stop staring, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The light remained, an unexplained presence in the wild, stormy night. My old truck's radio suddenly went quiet. Static first, then complete silence. That wasn't unusual during bad weather, but something felt different this time. All the electronics in the cab dimmed for a second. Dashboard lights flickering, stereo shutting off, even my phone screen losing power. On the dash cam, the screen went black for 5 full seconds before returning. Earlier, I'd been watching a strange light pulsing steadily on the screen. I tried calling it in, thinking maybe the sheriff's office would want to know about a stranded camper, but my phone had 0 signal. The road curved, and the light disappeared behind a thick cluster of fir trees. When the dashcam screen came back, the light was gone, completely vanished. No glow, no flicker. I blinked, confused, and checked the mirrors. Nothing unusual. The wind still rattled the trees, rain still falling, but that mysterious light had disappeared. As I approached the next turn, headlights appeared, a pickup about a mile down the road, moving slowly with bright lights. I thought it might be a sheriff's cruiser checking on me, but it was just some guy. He nodded quickly, then turned off the highway onto a small, unlit gravel driveway leading into the woods. I watched him disappear into the darkness, an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. Checking the dashcam again, I noticed something strange. At least 10 minutes of footage were missing. I rolled down the window, turned off the windshield wipers. The rain had lightened, but wind still shook the truck. A low, distant hum caught my attention, steady like a generator or transformer running far away. Then I noticed Juno, my dog, growling softly in the back seat. She never growled unless something was wrong. I reached back to comfort her, but she kept staring out the side window, ears alert and tense. I was camping alone up near Marshall Ridge, north end of the state park. This was the first solo trip I'd taken since moving out of the city, and I'd been to this area a few times before. Early October brought crisp nights, and the place was dead quiet. About 4 miles off the gravel forest service road, I'd found a small clearing near a shallow stream. My plan was simple: a weekend of off-road hiking, cooking over the fire, sleeping in the tent, and trying to break free from my city habit of constantly checking my phone. Service was spotty near the ridge trail, but down in the clearing, it was practically non-existent, something I actually appreciated, at least during the day. The first night seemed completely ordinary. I got a fire going, cooked some beans and rice, and spent time watching the tray as sway. The atmosphere was calm, with no wind, just a few late crickets and occasional rustling in the brush, probably just raccoons or deer. Around 10:30, I turned in for the night. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. Later, driving home on Highway 95, something changed. I couldn't see anything outside except the road, trees, and dark sky. A strange hum faded after a few seconds, and the radio crackled back to life with static before returning to music. When I played back the dashcam footage, everything looked normal except for a missing chunk of video. Back home, after settling Juno with water and food, I checked the dashcam again. That's when I noticed something bizarre. Just before the screen went black during those missing minutes, a light flickered on, closer to the road this time, maybe 20 feet off the pavement. Hovering just above the ground, it pulsed like a heartbeat, faster and more intense. I rewound the footage repeatedly, trying to catch something more. All I could see was the rhythmic pulse in the dark woods, with an overwhelming sense that I wasn't supposed to be there. I've never told anyone about this in real life. It sounds crazy, I know, but sometimes when I'm driving that same stretch, I catch a fleeting glimpse of a flicker out the passenger window. The light never stays long, and the road always appears empty. Yet Juno's ears perk up, as if she knows something I don't. I can't explain what I saw or why it was there, but I'm pretty sure that night on Highway 95, something was watching me back. Night fell, and I was already exhausted from the day's hike to the overlook. My legs ached, so I skipped setting up a fire and just made a quick sandwich. Settling into my camp chair, I gazed upward. The night sky was incredible. The Milky Way stretched out in a brilliant display I'd never seen before. I'm not an astronomy expert, but I enjoy scanning the sky, tracking satellites and their movements. Around 9:45, a small, steady white light caught my attention. It moved slowly from west to east, exactly like a typical satellite. Then something extraordinary happened. The light stopped, completely. Not a gradual fade or a slow drift, but an immediate, precise halt mid-sky. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks, so I stood up, trying to use the tree line as a reference point. It remained motionless. For several minutes I watched, transfixed. Suddenly, the light began to flicker. Not randomly, but in a deliberate pattern. 2 quick flashes, a pause, then a longer pulse. The rhythm was consistent, almost mechanical. Just as I was rationalizing it might be a drone or some specialized satellite, it shot straight up. The acceleration was unreal. No sound, no trailing light, just an instantaneous vertical ascent that thinned the light to a pinpoint before vanishing entirely. My sandwich sat untouched on the chair's armrest. I wasn't scared, exactly. More like my brain was struggling to categorize what I'd just witnessed. That night, every small sound seemed amplified. A twig snapping made my heart race, though nothing actually approached my tent. By morning, I was half convinced I'd imagined the entire event. Maybe it was an oddly banking plane or some atmospheric anomaly. I packed up, tried to shake off the experience, and didn't mention it to anyone back in town. But this wasn't the end of the story. 2 weeks later, I would return to that same spot. I went back to that same clearing, this time with Thistle, my mutt, who's probably part shepherd and healer. She's incredibly smart, and I thought having her around might help. I figured some company would make the trip better. Everything seemed normal at first, but the second night got weird. The sky was overcast, no stars visible. Around 8:30, Thistle started acting strange. She was whining near the camp's edge, facing the tree line. Her ears were back, tail down, not growling, just a nervous, low whine. I clipped her to a lead tied around a pine and tried to calm her. She kept staring at one specific patch of trees about 10 yards away. My flashlight revealed nothing, no eye shine, no movement. But she wouldn't stop watching. Eventually, she curled up under my chair, still facing that same direction, her entire body tense. Exhausted, I went to bed early and zipped up the tent, bringing Thistle inside. After midnight, I woke up sweating. The air felt heavy, despite the cool night. Thistle sat upright next to me, ears perked, completely silent. At first, I heard nothing. Then I realized the silence was unnatural. No bugs, no rustling, just absolute stillness, as if someone had hit mute on the entire forest. A faint hum emerged, not mechanical, but a deep tone you could feel in your chest. Soft and steady, it maintained a constant pitch. I unzipped the tent and looked out. The woods appeared normal, dark, windless, but the hum was stronger outside, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Sleep was impossible after that. About 20 minutes later, the hum stopped. The forest gradually returned to life. Crickets chirped, a breeze rustled, an owl hooted in the distance. Thistle finally relaxed, but kept facing the tent flap. While packing up the next morning, something caught my eye. In the clearing, about 6 feet from my tent, the grass was flattened into a perfect circle. Not just matted from walking, but evenly pressed as if rolled, around 4 feet across, with every blade bent uniformly. I was driving back from my cousin's place in Cedar Bluff, way out near the Tennessee border, where it's nothing but woods and winding roads. Late evening, close to 11, after spending time in his driveway watching his kids chase fireflies. The night was crisp and clear, with that classic early October smell of leaves and wood smoke. Highway 64 took me most of the way, but I cut onto back roads to save about 20 minutes. This road near Lake Burton is dark, no streetlights, barely any traffic. I'd made this drive countless times before. My windows were cracked, the radio playing softly in the background. Suddenly, the radio DJ's voice vanished mid-sentence. Not static, not fading, just complete silence. I checked the volume and station, but everything looked normal. Then I noticed something odd about the roadside trees. They were illuminated, but not by headlights. A faint glow descended from above, giving the branches a strange silvery edge. I checked for the moon, but it wasn't even visible. Later, I discovered 3 circular patches in the grass. They were perfectly flat, about 2 feet across each. One sat behind a tree, another near a stream against a rock. They weren't randomly placed, but seemed deliberately positioned. Something about them felt intentional. I never photographed these spots. Maybe I didn't want proof. Maybe the scene resisted documentation. Since then, I've stopped camping alone in that area. I still hike nearby, but not overnight. My dog Thistle won't even exit the car now if we're near that ridge road. She just stares and whines, the same low sound from that night, like she remembers something I can't see. Now, whenever I spot satellites, I watch a little longer, just to be sure. I was driving home late that night, earlier from my cousin's place. The week had a new moon, and as I leaned forward through the windshield, something immediately struck me. The sky was completely empty of stars. Not just dim or sparse, but a massive, perfectly defined triangle of darkness blocking everything behind it. This shape wasn't lit up or flashing, just a darker section against the night sky. It was enormous, stretching beyond my windshield's view. I craned my neck, trying to comprehend its scale. The object hovered maybe 200 or 300 feet up, gliding impossibly slow and smooth, like a silent balloon. No wind, no hum, just an unnatural stillness that felt wrong given its immense size. Without thinking, I pulled my truck onto the shoulder, door cracked open, staring upward. A faint, steady glow edged the underside, soft white light, not beams but a consistent illumination. The air felt heavy and thick. My breathing seemed louder than normal. Luna, my dog in the back seat, started whining, not barking, but a low, miserable sound that suggested pure fear. Standing outside now, my eyes adjusted to reveal subtle shapes underneath, circles or possibly vents. It didn't resemble any aircraft I'd seen before. Too large, too silent. Sharp back corners that looked completely non-aerodynamic. Matte black, blending into the sky except where it blocked starlight. It continued moving in a perfectly straight line over the road and through the treetops, never changing speed or direction. When it finally disappeared behind the trees, the radio suddenly snapped back on. Same DJ, as if nothing unusual had happened. I was working as a train operator for a regional freight line out west, running routes through mostly desert terrain. Long, empty stretches between small towns defined my world, just sand, scrub, and distant landscapes. Most nights, it was just me, the engine rumbling beneath my feet and the endless black sky overhead. The kind of job where solitude becomes your companion, with only the radios crackling and the steady clack of wheels on rails breaking the silence. This happened in early April. The desert was in that strange transitional phase. Nights cool, but not freezing. Days warming enough to create an odd atmospheric tension. The sky was crystal clear. Stars scattered across the horizon as far as I could see. I was running a late shift, hauling a long string of empty cars from a small yard near Marfa, Texas, headed northeast toward POS. The tracks cut through an incredibly desolate patch of desert near milepost 132, with no towns or road crossings. Something happened during that shift, something I've struggled to explain. Afterward, I was driving my truck, feeling dazed. Luna, my dog, was unusually agitated, whining and staring intently out the back window. The whole experience felt surreal, like a fragment of something larger that had been abruptly cut short. About 10 minutes after whatever occurred, I passed an old gas station typically closed at night. Its sign lights flickered eerily, as if suffering from bad wiring. The pumps were dark, no cars around, just those buzzing lights stuttering against the darkness. I didn't stop. At home, I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Luna sat on the porch, staring up at the trees, completely unlike her normal self. The next day, I discovered a thin layer of grayish dust on my truck's windshield, only on the glass, not the hood or roof. When I wiped it, the substance left a streak like soot or ash. There were no fires nearby, no explanation for its presence. The radio worked fine, with clear reception on the same station. I've traveled that route many times since, but something changed. Now I roll the windows up and keep my eyes firmly on the road. Luna still whines whenever we approach that specific stretch, a silent reminder of something unexplained that happened that night. The desert night was empty, just scrub and weathered rock formations. I'd traveled this route countless times before, but something felt different that evening. My hands rested on the throttle as I watched the gauges when something caught my eye. About a quarter mile to my right, a row of small lights hugged the ground, perfectly aligned with the train's path. At first, I assumed it might be a vehicle or workers with flashlights. But no track crews were scheduled, and the radio remained silent when I tried to confirm. These lights moved unlike any vehicle I'd seen. They matched my train's speed precisely. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. It was as if something was deliberately tracking me. Neat and evenly spaced, the tiny glowing orbs seemed to float just above the ground. I blinked repeatedly, hoping it was just fatigue playing tricks on my eyes. Yet each time I looked, they remained, hovering just behind a ridge or low brush. The radio was completely dead. No static, no answer, just absolute silence where there should have been the usual background hum. Curious, I eased the throttle back, crawling to get a better view. The lights adjusted immediately, maintaining their perfect synchronization. Something else struck me then. The air around them looked strange. Not like a typical heat shimmer, but cooler, more subtle. The space seemed warped, bending in unnatural ways. A deep, unsettling feeling settled in my stomach. I wasn't afraid exactly, but I felt watched, tracked by something that didn't belong. I checked the cab lights, scanned the windows for any possible explanation. Nothing was there. No vehicles, no workers, no wildlife, just those soft, glowing orbs maintaining their precise position. For nearly 20 minutes, I experimented with my speed. The lights continued their perfect dance, never closer, never fading. Then suddenly, they began moving backward, not away, but ahead of the train, defying every logical explanation. The desert track stretched out endlessly, silent and isolated. My train rolled forward, cutting through the darkness, when something caught my eye. Lights moved strangely outside, sliding, pausing, backing up with an almost rhythmic pattern that defied explanation. I tried to track them, but the shadows made it impossible. Even though I considered stopping the train, I knew that wasn't possible. No signals, no cell service out here, just an empty stretch of track. Something about these lights felt different. They weren't threatening, just observing. Studying. As dawn began to brighten the horizon, the lights flickered a few times, then vanished completely. Like someone had flipped a switch, no gradual fade, just instant absence. My instruments showed nothing unusual, and when the radio crackled back to life, dispatch responded normally. Later that day, something else strange happened. At the rail yard, a coworker mentioned power fluctuations near milepost 132, a signal relay glitch with no clear cause. The timing matched exactly with my light sighting. Those lights moved with an unnatural precision, almost like they were bending reality itself. I've driven that route countless times since and never saw them again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in that desert stretch, I catch faint glimmers just at the edge of my vision. Something out there, pacing silently alongside the train, watching. My supervisor laughed when I told him, dismissing it as a night shift hallucination. Desert mirages, he said. I wanted to believe him. But those lights, they weren't like anything mechanical or natural. They moved with a deliberate, intelligent rhythm that defied explanation. The mystery remains. I don't know what I saw that night, but something was out there, moving with perfect timing, perfectly silent. I was 17 and living out in the sticks, just outside a small town in Vermont. Our house sat at the edge of this sprawling patch of woods that my friends and I had been exploring since we were kids. Mostly just messing around, building forts, throwing sticks in the creek, that kind of thing. Nothing fancy. One afternoon in late October, I decided to take a walk by myself. It was getting toward dusk, around 5 p.m., and the light was fading faster than I expected. The sky was cloudy and low, with a damp chill in the air from an earlier rain. Leaves were wet and soggy underfoot, brown and orange and yellow mashed together. I'd wandered deeper than usual, heading toward this little clearing I hadn't seen much before. Juno was with me, her leash loose, and she bounded ahead, sniffing everything and wagging her tail like she owned the place. After a while, I noticed a strange light over one of the fields about a quarter-mile away. It wasn't like a flashlight or a car, no blinking or moving in a way that made sense, just a steady, glowing orb, maybe about the size of a basketball. It hovered silently a few feet above the tall grass, casting this soft, pale light over the field. I called Juno back and squinted toward the orb. It didn't seem to have a source like a streetlight or a drone. It was just there. I didn't feel like it was dangerous, but I also felt this weird pull, like I was being watched or drawn to it. I started walking closer, careful not to spook Juno. She trotted alongside me, occasionally looking up at the light. The orb didn't move, just stayed suspended. But as I got nearer, maybe 20 feet away, it started to rise slowly, like it was aware I was approaching. I stopped, my heart ticking up a little, but I didn't want to run or freak out. The light got higher and higher, moving straight up into the clouds that had thickened overhead. There was no sound, no change in the air, no wind stirring the grass below, just the orb climbing slowly and disappearing into the mist. I stood there for a moment, just watching until the orb was completely gone. Juno sat next to me, calm as ever, wagging her tail like nothing had happened. I told a few people about it later, but no one really believed me. There wasn't anything on the news, no reports of drones or anything unusual that night. I don't know what the orb was or why it was there. But every time I walk through that field now, I can't shake the feeling that something's still watching, waiting for me to come back. The woods opened up just off the trail, about a quarter-mile from the house, revealing a patch of mossy ground surrounded by dead trees. Among the gnarled roots, something caught my eye. An object, half buried in dirt and fallen leaves. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. At first glance, I thought it might be trash, but its shape was distinctive. Smooth and metallic, almost like polished steel. It was roughly the size of a softball, blackened in places, but not rough, more like it had been scorched clean. When I knelt down and touched it, I was surprised by its warmth. The air was cold, and there was no sunlight, yet the object radiated a steady heat, as if something ran beneath its surface. Carefully brushing off the dirt, I tried to pick it up. It was surprisingly heavy, dense and compact, like a solid chunk of metal. No wires, no markings, no dents or scratches that looked man-made, just smooth, dark, and weighty. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pocketed it, thinking my friend Jamie would be fascinated. He loved weird stuff, aliens, conspiracies, the unexplained. The walk home felt strange. The woods seemed unnaturally quiet, no birds, no wind rustling the trees, just an eerie stillness that made me uneasy. That night, I couldn't stop examining the object. Sitting on my bed, I turned it over in my hands. The warmth persisted, faint but undeniable. When I tried to clean it, the surface only appeared darker, as if absorbing the light. Was it a meteorite? A piece of crashed equipment? Nothing added up. The next day, Jamie and I returned to the clearing, gray and chilly, with just enough wind to stir the leaves. I reached into my pocket to show him the object, but something was wrong. Where I'd left it buried under the leaves, it was gone. We spent an hour searching through the clearing and surrounding ground, but finding nothing made the woods feel different that day. The air seemed thicker, and an unsettling sense of being watched crept over us. Jamie tried to brush it off as wind and shadows, but I wasn't convinced. Back home, a strange smell lingered on my hands, burnt metal mixed with wet earth. The object was gone, vanished without a trace. Over the next few days, odd occurrences began to pile up. Near the woods, I'd catch fleeting glimpses of light flickering between trees. Not headlights or flashlights, but tiny, almost imperceptible pulses of light with no accompanying sound. One night around 3 a.m., a faint humming drifted from deep in the woods. The sound wasn't constant, but rose and fell like something alive. I watched from my bedroom window, seeing nothing. When I told Jamie about it, he suggested an animal or nearby machine, but nothing made sense. There were only trees for miles. Stranger still, I started experiencing brief moments of lost time. Just seconds or a minute where the world would seemingly skip forward. These episodes happened more frequently when I was near the woods or thinking about the missing object. I kept this to myself, unsure if it was real or just exhaustion playing tricks. About a week later, I returned to the clearing alone. Cloudy skies and damp ground from earlier rain set a somber mood. Walking carefully over roots and stones, I searched methodically. Then I saw it, a weird circular pattern in the dirt near the original spot where we'd found the object. Something was definitely not right. The first time it happened, I was about 12 and home alone on a Saturday afternoon. Mom had gone to the grocery store, leaving me with instructions to stay inside, keep the dog calm, and not mess with the TV too much. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a sleepy suburb. Nothing special, but not creepy either. Just a standard 3-bedroom with a small backyard and a tall fence blocking most neighbors' views. I was sprawled on the couch, watching cartoons with Jib, my terrier mix, curled up beside me. Jib wasn't big, but he was scrappy, with a patchy coat that looked like someone had started a haircut and then given up. I'd had him since I was 8, and he was great company when Mom was out. The TV was an old CRT, bulky and scratched with those weird curved edges, tuned to a late-morning cartoon block. The show blared with loud colors and silly voices while I half paid attention, zoning out after a rough week at school. Suddenly, the screen flickered. This wasn't like a typical TV glitch or a momentary picture drop. It was something different. Later, I found myself in the woods, staring at a strange circular impression pressed into the earth. The surrounding leaves and grass were flattened, but not in a way that suggested someone had sat or walked there. Instead, it was smooth and precise, as if something had been set down and spun or pressed evenly. The circle seemed out of place, like the woods had been disrupted in a way that didn't align with natural movement. That familiar creeping unease returned. Something unseen seemed to be watching from just beyond the trees. I glanced over my shoulder and saw nothing, but the hair on my neck stood up. I left the clearing quickly and didn't return for a while. Since then, I've kept watch on the woods from my window and during Juno's walks. I haven't seen the object or the circle again. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I catch that faint burnt metal smell, like a ghost of that day. I still don't know what I found or where it went. It wasn't just some piece of junk, and it definitely wasn't natural. The whole experience feels like a half-remembered dream, something just beyond understanding. All I know is that part of those woods changed for me, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever left that object behind is still out there waiting. The whole image shattered like a camera lens, blinking open and closed. Suddenly, the cartoon van, our backyard replaced the screen, every detail crystal clear. The familiar grass, the fence, the small maple tree near the corner. Jib lay exactly where he'd been moments before, on the patio stones. Everything looked grainy, like a cheap security camera feed. The strange image held for maybe 5 or 6 seconds before the TV flickered and the cartoon returned, seamless as if nothing had happened. I sat completely still, uncertain whether I'd actually seen anything. Jib stretched and nudged my hand, breaking the eerie silence. Nervously, I flipped through channels and fiddled with the remote. Everything worked normally. The cable box didn't reset or blink. It seemed like a single weird glitch that had come and gone. When I told my mom later that day, she dismissed it easily. Maybe I'd hit a strange button or the signal had briefly stuttered. I didn't push the issue. I wanted to forget about it. But a few nights later, it happened again. This time, the house was darker. Mom was working late, and I was alone except for Jib's soft snoring and the refrigerator's steady hum. I was watching a horror movie packed with predictable jump scares when the TV flickered once more. The screen switched to that same grainy backyard view, but this time, something was different. At the fence's edge, where the street light barely touched the grass, a tall, shadowy figure stood motionless. No face was visible, just a blurry, dark shape watching silently. For those few seconds, nothing moved. Then the movie returned as abruptly as it had disappeared. I froze. Scanning the backyard through the window, I saw nothing. No movement, no sounds, not even leaves rustling. Jib growled softly and crawled closer, pressing against my leg. I whispered his name, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my neck. That night, I kept glancing between the window and TV, waiting, but nothing else happened. The next day, I asked my mom if she'd noticed anything strange. She just mentioned some neighborhood kids might be causing mischief. I'd been noticing weird interruptions on my TV, with random glimpses of my backyard appearing in the cable lines. These flashes showed up maybe twice a week, lasting just a few seconds each time. Sometimes the yard was empty. Sometimes my dog Jib was wandering around. But there was always this figure, always standing there, watching. Never moving closer, just present. I stopped talking about it to anyone. People would dismiss it as a technical glitch or signal interference, but I knew what I'd seen was real. 2 weeks later, one quiet evening, I was sitting in the darkened living room with only the TV on. Jib was asleep by the door. When the screen flickered again, showing the backyard, something was different. The figure looked taller, thinner, maybe closer, though the grainy picture made details hard to discern. Then I realized I wasn't looking at just one figure anymore. 3 or 4 were standing near the fence line, completely motionless like statues. As I leaned in, heart racing, one seemed to turn slightly toward the camera, like it knew I was watching. But just as quickly, the screen returned to the regular program. I sat there stunned, trying to understand. Was someone outside? Were these even human? The next day, I checked the backyard carefully. No footprints. No signs of disturbance. Jib sniffed around normally, showing no unusual behavior. I asked neighbors if they'd seen anything suspicious at night. No one had. A few nights later, just before turning off the TV, the flicker returned. This time, a strange bright light appeared outside the fence. Not like a typical flashlight or porch light, but a steady, low glow pulsing slowly, almost like a heartbeat. The same figures from before stood nearby, completely still. I watched for perhaps 10 seconds. The light remained constant, but the figures seemed expectant, waiting. Suddenly, the TV went black, then returned to the regular show. After that night, the strange interruptions became less frequent. Weeks passed without incident, and I started believing it was over. But about a month later, everything changed again. Early morning, just before sunrise, I was up feeding Jib and getting ready for school when something strange happened. Sitting on the couch with my cereal, the TV flickered to life with the backyard feed. This time, the image was crystal clear. I could see every detail, from the dew glistening on the grass to the soft morning fog rolling in. The yard was completely empty, except for one unsettling sight. Jib stood motionless in the center, his tail down and ears forward, staring directly at the camera. The moment seemed to stretch impossibly long, like a frozen image. Then, without warning, Jib turned and sprinted toward the gate. The feed abruptly cut out, replaced by the regular morning show. I rushed to the window, but Jib was already inside, lying by the door as if nothing had happened. Something felt deeply wrong, like I'd witnessed a moment that was both past and future. Since that day, I've kept the TV unplugged when I'm alone. Jib seems normal, but sometimes at night I catch him staring out the window with an intensity that unnerves me. The house went dark about 20 minutes after the storm that had been threatening all afternoon never showed up. I was in the kitchen, match still in hand from lighting a candle, when every appliance suddenly died. The refrigerator's hum, the heater's blower, even the microwave clock, all went silent at once. Outside, the woods behind my place were the blackest I'd ever seen. No moonlight, no glow from neighboring farms, just walls of cedar and fir pressing in from three sides. I live at the end of a dirt road near Wilson Creek, Washington, where the population might hit 300 during a holiday weekend. Power outages here can go unnoticed for hours. Cedar, my dog, trotted in from the mudroom, her toenails clicking on the linoleum. She looked up, waiting for a signal. I set the candle down and tried my phone. No reception. Grabbing the flashlight from the drawer, I stepped onto the back deck to check if the power outage was isolated to my place. I still don't know what those TV flickers meant or who was watching me through the screen. The entire experience left me with more questions than answers. The night was dead silent. No wind rustled the trees, no highway engines hummed in the distance, not even an owl broke the stillness. My flashlight beam cut a tight circle in the yard, silvering the frost-killed grass near the tree line. Cedar beside me tilted his head and sniffed the air. Then the first glow appeared. Floating just above the treetops, maybe 10 feet up, it looked like a match flare drifting lazily from left to right. I initially thought it was a drone, perhaps some kid testing out new Christmas tech. But there was no buzz, no blinking navigation lights, just a solid, gentle gleam. I kept my light trained on it, expecting some reflection or shadow on the branches below. Nothing happened. The trees remained black, and the light moved as if the branches didn't exist. Cedar let out a low whine. Suddenly, another orb emerged, emerald green, ping-pong ball-sized, moving in parallel with the first. Both lights paced each other, sliding east above the forest canopy. I switched off my flashlight to watch more closely. With the house dark behind me, my eyes adjusted quickly. These orbs weren't bright enough to illuminate the pine needles beneath them. Instead, they floated, changing colors every few seconds. Orange to blue, blue to pale violet, violet to green, always with the same rhythm. My pulse hammered. Part of me wanted to grab a camera, but another part didn't want to interrupt this moment. The lights slow, aligned vertically, then split apart, tracing graceful arcs. They moved like silent fireflies performing a choreographed dance, meeting and separating in an intricate pattern. "What are you?" I whispered, feeling slightly foolish. The topmost orb flared white, just an instant, but bright enough to silhouette the tree crowns. No shadows touched the ground. Cedar yelped and pressed against my leg. The white faded to red, then steadied. A third orb appeared from behind the cedar stand. Larger and a deeper gold, it moved with clear intention, sliding directly toward the smaller lights. They wheeled aside, then formed a perfect triangle. Equidistant, glowing softly, the orbs began cycling colors in perfect unison. The hairs on my arms lifted. The air felt electrically charged. The night hung silent. Even Cedar stopped whining. She pressed against my knee, staring intently. My gaze drifted back to the house, its windows solid black rectangles. Were these lights visible from the road, or meant only for me? The thought gnawed at me. I stepped forward. The deckboard creaked beneath my foot. Instantly, the orbs swung to face me, if you could call it facing. No lenses, no discernible front or back, yet I felt their attention lock onto me. A pulse rippled through all three, blue, white, then darkness. For a breathless moment, I thought they'd vanished. But faint, translucent spheres lingered, barely brighter than the sky. Then the largest orb did something different. It dropped a yard or two, paused, and pulsed a muted amber. The glow spread like water ripples, expanding until it passed over the smaller lights. When it reached the treetops, each needle seemed to shimmer as if seen through heat waves. My phone remained unresponsive. Dead battery? Impossible. I'd had 80% before the power cut. The triangle between the lights flexed, its edges stretching and contracting like elastic space. Suddenly, the two smaller orbs shot laterally, skimming the tree line in opposite directions. They didn't accelerate. They simply shifted, reappearing 50 yards apart with no motion blur. Cedar barked once. Instantly, the central orb blazed white-hot. A gentle warmth washed over my face like standing near a campfire. The light wasn't blinding, but I squinted. Then they left, vertically. The smaller orbs rose first, straight lines, no arcing, accelerating so fast they vanished in seconds. The large orb lingered a heartbeat longer, flickered violet, and zipped upward, shrinking to a pinpoint against the stars before disappearing. Darkness engulfed the yard. My eyes searched for any trace. Nothing. Forest sounds rushed back, wind rattling branches, distant rustlings, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The baby monitor had always picked up some light static. Old house, thick walls, lots of random interference. I'd heard everything from passing cop cars to neighbors' radios in the past. Nothing strange. It was one of those basic audio-only models. No video, just a little white unit that clipped to my jeans during the day and sat on my nightstand while I slept. The receiver was in Bea's room, short for Beatrice, but no one called her that. She was only 9 months old at the time. It was early March, still cold enough at night that the windows stayed shut. My husband Daniel was working nights that week. He's a respiratory therapist and gets floated to different shifts sometimes, so I was alone in the house with Bea. Just us and our dog Poppy, a scruffy red mutt who sleeps under the crib. The first night I really noticed anything weird was a Tuesday. Cedar's tags clinking caught my attention as she shook herself. I flicked my flashlight back on. The beam seemed pathetic now. I scanned the tree line for any sign. Broken limbs, scorched bark, but everything looked normal. Inside, the power was still out. I tried the phone again. It lit up. 76% battery, 2 bars of signal. No missed calls, no alerts. I opened the camera app and took a picture of the kitchen wall just to prove to myself the device worked. The electricity came back around 3 a.m. I knew because every light I'd forgotten to switch off snapped on at once, waking me. I walked room to room, turning them off, then sat at the kitchen table until dawn, replaying every second in my mind. I never found scorch marks or radiation burns or whatever you're supposed to look for. The only oddity was Cedar. For 2 days, she refused to go near the back deck after sunset. She'd plant her paws and growl low until I coaxed her in through the front. I didn't call the sheriff or the power company. What would I tell them? That during a blackout, I saw lights that made no shadows, moved like thoughts, and left without a sound. A week later, I set a trail cam on a fence post aimed at the trees. It's been 5 months. The cameras caught deer, raccoons, a bear once. Nothing else. Still, every time the house cracks after dark, I pause whatever I'm doing and listen for that impossible hush, half hoping, half terrified it might come back. I was half asleep when the sound first caught my attention. A soft, rapid clicking came through the baby monitor, not from the room itself, but through the device. The noise was strange, like dog nails tapping on tile, but mechanical and too quick. I sat up and listened. It would stop for a few seconds, then start again. Soft, dry clicks in short bursts, followed by silence. I went to check on B.A. She was sleeping peacefully on her back, breathing evenly. Poppy barely moved, just thumped her tail when I entered. The monitor's red light glowed normally, and nothing seemed out of place. I waited, hoping to hear the clicking in person, but silence remained. Back in my room, the moment I closed the door, the clicking resumed. Clear as anything, right through the monitor. I unplugged the receiver, thinking it might be some kind of interference. Immediately, the sound stopped. The next day passed normally. I worked from home while Bea napped, took her for an afternoon walk, and Daniel called during his lunch break. I never mentioned the monitor incident. That night, while brushing my teeth, I heard it again, clicking mixed with low static. In the bedroom, I stared at the monitor. Quick bursts of clicks, then a pause, then more clicks. Listening carefully, something chilled me to the core. A voice emerged faintly beneath the static. At first, I thought it might be someone outside. I turned off the bathroom fan, straining to hear. The voice was quiet but clear, high-pitched, soft, definitely female, almost like a whisper directly into a microphone. "She's cold," the voice said, followed by static and more clicks. I froze. Bea wasn't cold. Her room had a space heater set to 70 degrees. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize it as interference from a neighbor's baby monitor. Then the voice repeated, "She's cold." But this time I realized something terrifying. It was my voice. Not similar, exactly mine. My specific way of ending words, the tired rasp in my tone. It was like a recording of myself, distorted and haunting. I unplugged the monitor and carried it into BA's room. She was still asleep. Poppy stood up and stretched, but didn't bark. I checked the windows, locked, closet empty. I even opened the crawl space door in the hall. Nothing. I left the monitor off and slept with Bea in bed with me. The next morning, I told Daniel about it, kind of laughing it off like it was weird, but probably just interference. He didn't say much, just raised an eyebrow. He's not into creepy stuff and doesn't like when I watch horror movies after dark. I thought maybe it was done. Maybe it was just some fluke. Thursday night was normal. Daniel was off and we had dinner together. He went to bed early since he had to be up at 5. I stayed up late folding laundry. Around midnight, something changed. I walked past the monitor and heard my name, not Mom or Mommy. My name, Marley. It came through low and slow, buried in white noise. I froze and stared at it. Then it said my name again, a little louder. My voice, but not like I was speaking, more like I was reading it out loud, flat and deliberate. I picked up the monitor and stood holding it. 3 clicks, then the voice returned, more warped, with something off about the pitch. "She's watching," it said. I went to B's room. She was asleep. I turned on the light and looked around. No shadows, no movement. But Poppy was different. Instead of being under the crib like usual, she was pressed against the door, ears flat, staring at the wall behind the dresser. I walked over and moved the dresser aside. Just a blank wall. I knocked on it, then crouched and looked behind it with my phone light. No cracks, no openings, nothing that could make a sound. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the rocking chair with B on my chest and Poppy at my feet. Every time I started to drift off, I imagined hearing my own voice again, right behind my ear. Friday morning, Daniel offered to stay home from work, but I told him not to. I wanted to see if anything happened while I was fully awake. That evening, around 9, I plugged the monitor back in and set it on the kitchen counter while loading the dishwasher. I figured I'd listen while I cleaned. It crackled a bit, then went quiet for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing happened. I kept glancing at it between dishes. Just a red light, just air. Then I heard breathing. Not Bea's soft breathing. I unlocked both deadbolts and pulled the blinds, shaking. Something felt wrong. The house was silent except for a faint rustle from the monitor. My voice had spoken, but I hadn't said anything. Daniel wasn't home yet. I unplugged the monitor and grabbed B, heading straight to my mom's house. In the guest room, I slept with Bea beside me. I didn't tell her everything, just mentioned the house felt creepy with Daniel gone. The next day, I bought a new digital, encrypted monitor from the hardware store. Daniel installed it that afternoon. Since then, nothing strange has happened. No clicking, no voices, no static. Poppy returned to sleeping under the crib. We kept the old monitor in the garage, tucked inside a plastic tub of cords and cables. About a month later, Daniel was searching for a charger when he came back asking why I'd left the monitor on. I told him I hadn't touched it. He said it was clicking again. The first circle appeared near the back fence, about 10 feet from the wood's edge. I spotted it while feeding chickens around 6:30 in the morning. It was a perfect, dinner plate-sized burn in the grass, not just flattened, but scorched and brittle, as if someone had pressed a hot pan directly onto the ground. I wondered if local kids might have used fireworks, though that seemed unlikely. My home sits 20 minutes outside Ellison, near the ridge line. It's mostly pasture and pine, with neighbors a quarter mile down the gravel road. Not the kind of place teenagers typically wander. I brushed it off initially, but the next morning, another circle appeared. Then 2 more the following day. They kept coming. Same size, same shape, same crisp edge. No signs of disturbance around them, no scorch trails, no footprints, no evidence of anything dragging over the grass. Just these perfect circles appearing in unexpected places. One near the rain barrel, another by the dog's pen, and one right in the middle of the back pasture. My photos never captured their strangeness. They just looked like ordinary dry patches. So I asked my sister Lacey to come take a look. She's practical, used to work at the A Extension office. Walking around that Saturday morning, she suggested it might be a fungus, maybe fairy rings, but even she admitted she'd never seen anything so symmetrical or deeply blackened. That night, I kept the porch light on and let Cricket, my mutt dog, part beagle, part shepherd, sleep inside instead of her usual spot by the woodpile. She's always alert, sharp as can be. Around 3:15 in the morning, she growled, low and steady, not barking, not moving, just staring out the window. I got up and listened. At first, nothing. No footsteps, no engine sounds. Then a faint buzzing, like a transformer but higher pitched. Barely audible, almost like a ringing you're not sure is real. It faded after about a minute. Stepping onto the porch, I found everything motionless. The woods were silent, no wind, no crickets. Dead quiet. It felt wrong, not like a typical pressure drop before a storm, but something different, too still, too thick. The next morning revealed 5 new circles. They weren't clustered, but spread across the back field in a deliberate pattern. Not random. Each circle the same distance apart, forming a slightly angled grid, as if aligning with something invisible. I called the sheriff's office to ask about trespassers or vandalism. The guy wasn't concerned. Suggested maybe teenagers or someone flying a drone with a heat lamp, an explanation that made little sense to me. That evening, I set up my game cam facing the back pasture, an older model, but reliable. It had captured plenty of wildlife before, deer, foxes, even a bobcat last spring. The morning after, the SD card revealed something unusual, a single video from 3:12 a.m., just 10 seconds of TV-style static, which had never happened before. No other activity was recorded that night, not even when I walked out to check. 3 more circles appeared, one right where the camera had been pointing. I took the camera down, feeling a growing unease I was reluctant to acknowledge. Only Lacey knew about this. She had offered to stay over, but I refused. I didn't want her here if something strange was happening. The situation felt off, like the rules of reality were subtly shifting. It wasn't threatening, not yet, but something was definitely wrong. The circles continued to appear, never more than 5, always between midnight and dawn. I began staying up, sitting by the window with Cricket and a thermos of coffee, lights off. The dog would get restless around 3 a.m., sometimes growling or pacing, but nothing ever materialized. About a week in, something truly bizarre occurred. Around 3:20, I was standing at the kitchen window, looking out over the back field. The stars were brilliantly clear overhead. Suddenly, a section of stars simply vanished. It wasn't clouds moving in, the shape was too precise. A wide, flat arc moved silently across the sky, an absence of light that blocked out the stars. No outline, no lights, just a silent glide. As it passed overhead, the stars blinked back into existence. The next morning, the circles looked different. They were deeper, with the soil singed about an inch down. One circle bore a perfect spiral pattern, with tiny, even ridges like grooves in a record. That night, I sat on the porch with a flashlight and binoculars, Cricket at my feet. Around 3:10, the air shifted. A high-pitched buzz returned, my ears popped, and Cricket whimpered, hiding behind the bench. Though I saw nothing, a sudden, sharp wind kicked up. Oddly, the trees remained motionless. The grass bent in patches, as if invisible footsteps were walking through the field. 2 nights ago, I woke around 3:15 with an unsettling feeling. The house seemed different, and my dog wasn't in her bed. I found her sitting by the back door, ears up and tail rigid, completely unresponsive to my calls. Through the glass, I spotted something strange in the field. 5 soft white spheres, about the size of basketballs, hovering around and 5 feet off the ground. They moved in a slow, synchronized arc across the pasture, scanning the ground without bouncing or flickering. I watched, barely breathing, as they drifted to the far fence and then suddenly blinked out, not fading, just vanishing. This wasn't the first odd occurrence. Last spring, I'd started taking long exposure photos at night, partly due to insomnia after my job went remote. Living just outside Helena, Montana, on a few acres next to Forest Service land, I had perfect conditions for night sky photography. With my old college tripod and a Sony A7, I'd head out around 11 and capture 30-second exposures. Then the strange events began. First came brief, indecipherable impressions that disappeared almost instantly. A buzzing sound lasted about 5 minutes before stopping. By daylight, I discovered 7 new circles in the field, some with a spiral pattern. One circle contained a dead crow, perfectly still, as if frozen and thawed, with no visible injuries or blood. I buried the bird without telling anyone. Using my neighbor's metal detector, I swept the circles. No metal, no debris, just oddly warm ground, slightly above air temperature, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. Since that night with the lights, everything has been silent. The grass is growing back in the old spots. Some spirals remain faintly visible when the light hits right. I haven't mowed the backfield in over a week. Honestly, I'm not eager to walk out there. I'd usually spend an hour or two out there, setting up my camera facing northeast toward the tree line. That first night was a Tuesday, and I almost skipped it after working late. But the sky was too clear to waste. After a few warm-up shots, something caught my eye. There was this bright point just above the horizon that defied everything I knew about night sky photography. While every other star would streak slightly with exposure time or rotation, this one remained perfectly stationary, not even a pixel's movement. I tried different approaches. I zoomed in digitally, walked left and right to check for parallax, took multiple photos with varying exposure times. Nothing changed. The point stayed crisp and white, with no color fringing or lens artifacts. I initially thought it might be a satellite or a planet like Venus, but something felt different. The next night, I returned to the same spot at the same time. Using a star map app, I confirmed something strange. The point wasn't registering on any astronomical tracking system. Satellites, stars, planets were all mapped, but this dot was invisible to technology. For 20 minutes, I stood in the grass, hands in my coat pockets, watching this anomaly. Then, without warning, it simply vanished. Not a gradual fade, but an instant disappearance, like someone had flipped a switch. I waited another half hour, but it never returned. The sky looked completely normal again, as if nothing unusual had happened. I went inside and checked the weather, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. I kept seeing this strange white dot in the sky over several nights. It wasn't like anything I'd normally see, completely stationary while everything else moved. The first time, conditions were normal, clear skies, no weird atmospheric disturbances, nothing unusual on the radar. After taking a sequence of 5 photos over 15 minutes and overlaying them in Photoshop, I noticed something odd. Every star showed movement trails, but this single dot remained perfectly still. Something about it started to feel unsettling, like it wasn't just a celestial object, but something watching me. I began feeling constantly observed when outside. This sensation was so strong that I stopped going out for a while. 2 weeks passed with nothing unusual. Then one night, I took my shepherd mix, Clover, out late. She's normally quick to do her business, but this time she froze halfway off the porch. Her ears were up, tail rigid, staring intently into the dark backfield. When I followed her gaze, the white point was there again, high and motionless. Crouching beside her, I noticed she didn't bark or growl, just watched tensely. Suddenly, she whined softly, backed up to the door, and started pawing urgently. I brought her inside and locked up, then watched from the bedroom window for over an hour. Around 2 a.m., it vanished as before, simply blinking out. After that, I found myself constantly checking the sky, even during daylight. I tried satellite tracking apps, hoping to identify it, but nothing matched. This dot followed no known path and appeared on no charts. Late one May night, things got stranger. Past midnight, I stood outside with my tea. The sky was cloudless, wind swaying pine branches. Suddenly, 2 identical bright points appeared, same size, same brightness, one in its usual eastern position, the other near the southern treetops. Neither moved or flickered. Seeing 2 made everything feel more deliberate, more intentional. Something about their coordination felt deeply unnerving. After 10 minutes, I went inside and pulled all the curtains, unsettled by what I'd witnessed. I work the night shift at a small grocery store on the edge of town, the kind of place that sees more shadows than customers after 11 p.m. My name's Jesse, and I'd been pulling these late shifts for about 6 months when the weird stuff started. I don't usually believe in anything out of the ordinary. No ghosts, no aliens, no anything. The store's parking lot was big, but mostly empty overnight. It had maybe 20 spots, a few streetlights that flickered sometimes, and a chain-link fence separating us from an abandoned lot next door. Usually, the only thing out there were stray cats or the occasional drifter. I'd clock in around 10 p.m., do my rounds stocking shelves, check the cameras, and just wait for morning. The silence was thick, but it kept me company. It was a Tuesday, late October, and the air was sharp and cold, dry enough to make your breath fog up when you stepped outside. I was finishing my break around midnight when I looked out the front window and saw something that didn't make sense. There was a figure standing by the edge of the parking lot near the fence, just standing, not moving at all. After that night, strange things started happening. I began noticing lights in the woods, low, down in the trees. They were faint like lanterns or flashlights, but with a bluish hue. These lights would appear for a few seconds, then fade, never in the same place twice. Clover, my dog, started acting weird. She'd refuse to go outside at night, sitting at the door and whimpering. I had to take her out earlier, before dusk. One night around 3 a.m., I heard what sounded like someone walking in the gravel outside the barn. Just 3 or 4 slow crunches, then silence. I waited at the window with a flashlight, but never saw anything. I don't think anyone was out there. Mid-June, I saw the fixed star for the last time. It was higher up than before. I took one handheld photo and then stopped. It felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to look anymore. That night, the power flickered 3 times. No storms, no wind. It just blinked out, came back, blinked again. My phone froze, and I couldn't unlock it for almost 10 minutes. I stayed on the couch with all the lights on. I haven't seen it since. Sometimes I still check, glancing out the kitchen window or stepping onto the porch when it's clear. Nothing's there. But I don't take photos anymore. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe someone was waiting for a friend or just hanging out near the fence. But something felt different. The person standing there was completely motionless, not shifting, not scratching, not looking around, just frozen, like a stone statue. From a distance, I could make out their silhouette. Tall, dressed in dark clothes that blended perfectly with the night, their face hidden under a hood. No car nearby, no backpack, nothing that suggested they were simply waiting. I blinked and looked away for a second, then back. The figure remained exactly the same. I radioed security, not out of fear, but as a standard procedure. "Hey Mike, can you check the parking lot? There's someone standing by the fence." Mike said he'd be there in a few minutes. My eyes stayed locked on that corner, watching intently. As minutes passed, the figure didn't budge. Not a single movement, no blinking, no shifting, no indication they were aware of my gaze. A strange sensation crept over me, a cold, heavy pressure in the air. The temperature seemed to drop, but it was more than just that. The night itself felt different, thickened around this mysterious figure. When Mike arrived in the security car, his headlights swept across the lot. I expected the figure to run or move, but they remained perfectly still. Mike stepped out and radioed back. No one here. Confused, he looked directly where I'd seen the person, but found nothing. I insisted I was looking right at them, but when I glanced back through the window, they were gone, completely vanished. The speed was unnerving. One moment solid, the next, nothing. I rushed outside to look, but there were no traces. No footprints, no evidence anyone had been there. Mike suggested it might have been a trick of light or my imagination. I didn't argue. We returned to our rounds, but I kept looking out the window. Then I noticed something even stranger. The security cameras covering the lot showed absolutely no sign of the figure. Not a single frame captured anyone standing by the fence. I asked Mike if the cameras were functioning correctly. He confirmed they were. I carefully rewound the footage, watching intently. Before and after showed only an empty lot. No flicker, no glitch, just blank asphalt and shadows. Night after night, something strange haunted me at work. During my shifts, I'd catch a glimpse of a figure standing motionless in the parking lot. At first, I thought I was imagining things after a long day, but when it happened again, I knew something was off. The figure was always in the same spot, perfectly still. No breathing, no blinking. When I called security, Mike would arrive, and the moment he stepped out, the figure would vanish. This wasn't my imagination. Some nights, the street lamps would cast an odd light on the figure, making its edges seem too sharp. Its shadow never quite matched its shape. I'd see something flickering at the edge of my vision, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. A strange pressure hung in the air, growing heavier each time. When I told Pweet, the store manager, he laughed it off, suggesting it might be an old mannequin. But I knew better. No mannequin stands outside a fenced parking lot for hours, completely motionless, only to disappear when someone approaches. The frequency of these encounters decreased, but the feeling lingered. I became more cautious, locking doors early and making sure Poppy was inside before leaving. Once, I thought I saw a shadow flicker in my rearview mirror, but the lot was empty when I looked back. That night shift, the unexplained figure, and its mysterious disappearances, none of it made sense. Just a still shape in the dark, watching or waiting for something unseen. My name's Eli, and I've been fishing these parts of the coast near Cape Falcon, Oregon for years. It's a quiet stretch of small coves and rocky shorelines that I thought I knew well. That morning started like any other, until I noticed the compass acting up just before dawn. The morning was still and gray, the kind of quiet that hangs heavy before dawn breaks. My old aluminum boat, the Seafarer, cut through the water as Scout, my loyal dog, part lab and part something wild, sat curled behind me. We'd been fishing buddies for 3 years, and today I was heading to a small cove hidden behind a wind-blocking bluff. Something felt off from the moment I approached. My compass went haywire, its needle spinning erratically instead of pointing north. I'd used this compass for years and knew it was typically rock-solid reliable. Shaking it didn't help. The needle kept jerking wildly. Scout seemed to sense something too, lifting his head and staring intently at the water. The location should have been free from any magnetic interference. Granite rocks surrounded the area, and no power lines were nearby that could explain the compass malfunction. My GPS worked perfectly, showing our exact position, but the compass remained completely unpredictable. Every time I drew close to the cove, it would go crazy again. An unnatural stillness hung over the place. No birds called, no fish broke the water's surface, no wind rustled the bluff's trees. It was like the cove existed in its own silent bubble. Scout stood frozen, hackles raised, staring toward the opposite shore. Then I saw him, a tall, thin figure in a dark jacket and hat, standing near some driftwood at the cove's edge. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, just staring directly at me. When I blinked, he vanished. No footprints, no trace he'd ever been there. Tom, a fellow fisherman I know who's been around longer than anyone, had heard stories about the cove. When I mentioned the compass and the strange figure, he frowned. People said the place was cursed, with weird things happening at night, but Tom never believed those tales. I was equally skeptical. Ghost stories aren't my thing. Yet something was off. The compass kept spinning whenever I approached the cove, and Scout, my dog, grew increasingly uneasy. One evening, I decided to investigate. After dark, I stayed on the boat under a dim lantern, watching the water. Around 10 p.m., everything changed. The wind vanished completely, and fog crept in low, consuming the cove. The compass needle began spinning, first slowly, then faster. Faint tapping sounds emerged, rhythmic against the boat's hull. Scout growled and perked up, but the fog obscured everything. I shouted. No response. Then the tapping stopped. The compass suddenly pointed north, steady and sharp. Through the thickest part of the fog, I glimpsed something strange. A dim light moving just beneath the water's surface, unlike any boat or buoy. Scout whimpered and crawled into my lap. The air felt heavy, as if something watched from beneath the waves. I didn't stay long. The next morning, I discovered unusual marks on the boat's hull, long, thin scratches like claw marks, with no sign of normal damage. When I showed Tom, he simply shook his head. I don't know, Eli. That place has always been weird. Since then, I've avoided the cove, sticking to familiar waters where my compass works and the sea sounds normal. But at night, out on the open water, I can't help glancing back. Something is there. Something that doesn't belong. Something I can't explain. My overnight freight runs were always quiet. This particular trip happened in mid-October, somewhere between Tucumari and Amarillo. I was hauling for a regional outfit out of Albuquerque, driving eastbound on I-40 with a delivery window at a warehouse just outside Oklahoma City. The cab heater was acting up, blowing way too hot, so I'd cracked the windows. Outside, the air was cold and dry, just above freezing. The moonlight was thin, barely illuminating the landscape. Everything looked washed out, the asphalt, the road signs, the horizon. My eyes were getting heavy from the long, monotonous drive. That's when I noticed something unusual. Off to my left, a dark shape was moving beneath me. At first, it was just a vague shadow sliding across the faintly glowing horizon. No blinking lights, no navigation beacons, nothing like a typical aircraft. I tilted my head, trying to focus. It was massive, at least the size of a football field, and its movement was unlike any aircraft I'd seen, smooth, steady, almost gliding under my plane. I checked the radar screen. Nothing. Absolutely no blips, no echoes suggesting another aircraft nearby. Uneasy, I called the control center. I asked if they were tracking anything at our altitude or just below. The controller sounded confused but confirmed. No flights, no weather balloons, no military exercises in the area. I kept watching. The object moved silently beneath the plane. No engine noise, no turbulence, no changes in air pressure or temperature. It looked like a big, flat triangle with sharp edges, faintly glowing. Not bright, just a soft outline against the darkness. The entire encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds before it slipped out from under me and vanished into the night. I called center again. Nothing had changed. The radar still showed nothing. When I landed, I logged the sighting and filled out a report. The airline didn't ask many questions, probably dismissing it as an atmospheric illusion or equipment glitch. But I know what I saw. It was real, and to this day, no one can explain it. Night was dead quiet along that Texas highway stretch after midnight. No color, no traffic anywhere. The first light caught me by surprise. Not headlights, but a sudden white flash directly in my center mirror. Like someone had flipped on a bright LED and aimed it right at my trailer. It appeared for a second and vanished just as quickly. No fade, just there and then not. I brushed it off as a weird reflection, maybe my running lights hitting a road sign or a distant high beam. But things got strange near mile marker 227. 20 minutes later, I passed that same marker again. I know this highway. That sign should have been behind me. No turns, no junctions that would loop me back. My GPS showed a steady eastward path with no deviations. The marker was identical. Same big dent in the post from a trailer backing into it. I remembered seeing it before. I slowed down and turned the radio low. Something felt deeply wrong. This wasn't just deja vu. My brain recognized every detail, the exact pothole, the small wheel shutter, then the light returned. Same spot in the mirror. A bright, artificial glare like sunlight reflecting off a windshield. Too white for headlights, too intense for taillights. No sound, no vehicles, no GPS changes. I kept driving. What else could I do? Another 20 minutes passed. I watched mile markers climb. 228, 229, 230. Maybe I'd imagined the repeat, perhaps a temporary maintenance marker. But around mile 350, I saw marker 227 again. Same bent post, same pothole, same mirror flash. Finally, I pulled over, hazards blinking in the middle of nowhere. Dead silence except for my cooling engine. I stepped out, trying to make sense of what was happening. I pulled over to the shoulder and walked around the trailer, checking everything. Tires were fine, latches secure, no dragging or flapping parts. The road stretched flat in both directions, with distant scrub brush and barbed wire fence. No other vehicles anywhere. Back in the cab, the GPS confirmed I was still heading east. Same highway, no loops or backtracking, but something felt off. I'd seen that same sign 3 times now, and I started driving slower, noticing strange details. The pavement suddenly felt unnaturally smooth, like it had just been freshly poured. No road crew anywhere. 2 power poles to the left looked warped, leaning inward toward each other in the darkness. A field I passed looked impossibly perfect, everything symmetrical. The bushes, fencing, even the grass under moonlight seemed artificially precise, like a digital copy-paste job. Then the third flash hit me differently. More a heat behind my eyes than a visual thing. It appeared dead center in the rearview mirror, flared across the back window, and vanished. I braked hard and pulled over again. Silence surrounded me. No wind, just the low engine idle. Suddenly, the radio died completely. Not just the station, the entire system. Dash lights went dark. It didn't even try searching for a signal. The dash clock froze at 4:4, unmoving despite my taps. Engine ran normally. GPS remained on. Just the radio and clock were gone. I sat motionless for maybe 10 minutes, scanning the empty highway for any sign of movement. Nothing came. When I eased back onto the road, the GPS map hadn't updated during my stop. It still showed me moving east, as if I'd never pulled over. Tapping the screen made the location marker jump, like it had just remembered I'd stopped. Mile after mile passed. 5 miles down, no more flashes, no more repeated signs. Just the endless, strange highway. I'd been hunting up in the Allegheny National Forest for years, close to 20 by that point, and I'd never seen anything I couldn't explain. Not once. I'm not saying I'm some expert woodsman, but I know what a bear sounds like walking through brush. I know what coyotes sound like at night. I know how deer behave when they sense something's off. This thing wasn't any of those. It was late October when it happened. I'd gone up on a solo weekend trip, partly for hunting, partly just to get out of the house. My wife was visiting her sister in Pittsburgh, and I figured I'd take the dog, Juno, and spend a couple nights at the old lean-to I'd built with my brother back in college. It was basic, 3 walls and a tin roof, but it stayed dry, and it was deep enough in the forest that I never saw another person. Juno's a black lab mix, mostly mellow, but good at alerting me if anything's around. She doesn't bark much unless something's really wrong, which is why what happened later stuck with me. The first night was uneventful. Clear skies, cold enough that I kept the fire going into the early morning. I set up a trail cam about 100 yards northeast of the lean-to where I'd spotted a good scrape line earlier in the month. I wasn't really expecting much. It was late in the season and I hadn't baited, but I figured maybe I'd get lucky. Later, driving back, everything looked normal again. Old fence lines, faded signs, a dead armadillo in the left lane. Stuff that actually made sense. I didn't breathe easy until I passed mile marker 235. New number, no dent, no deja vu. The radio came back on at 4:37. No static or warm-up. It just snapped back in with a song mid-play. Clock blinked once, then corrected itself. No explanation. I made the delivery just after 7. Didn't say anything to the dock guys. Didn't mention it to dispatch. I wasn't even sure how to start that conversation. Next time I ran that route, a week later, I checked for that mile marker. 2:27 was right where I remembered it. Same dent in the post. I passed it once like normal and kept going. No lights, no flashes, no weird fields or warped poles. But now, every time I'm on that stretch, I watch the mirror like a hawk. I keep the GPS zoomed in. I mark every mile in my head because I know what I saw. I know what I didn't imagine. And I still don't understand how I passed the same sign 3 times without ever turning around. I set up the trail cam on a birch tree, chest high, and angled toward the clearing. It was just a standard Browning, capable of taking stills and short video clips. The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Around 4:30 a.m., Juno suddenly sat up, completely still, ears forward, staring intently into the trees. At first, I thought it might be a deer or raccoon, but there were no sounds, no rustling leaves, no nocturnal movements. Even the wind had died down. My own breathing seemed loud in the silence. Juno remained motionless, watching something in the direction of the camera. I whispered to her, but she didn't react, not even a tail flick. The next day seemed odd. I hiked several miles, circled back, and checked for signs of wildlife. Nothing. The forest was unusually silent. No squirrels, minimal bird activity. That evening, I retrieved the SD card and set up my solar charger to review the footage. The video was mostly unremarkable. Some wind-shaken branches, a rabbit hopping by around 1 a.m. But then I saw something strange. A single frame, timestamped at 4:42 a.m., showed a perfect glowing sphere hovering about 6 feet off the ground in the clearing. It was white and blue, completely round, casting no shadow. This wasn't a lens flare or a drone. I know what those look like. The next frame was simply black. The camera feed cut off abruptly, as if it had been switched off mid-capture. I went back to check the camera. It was still securely strapped, battery full. I hadn't seen a single buck that day, and something felt distinctly off about the entire experience. I noticed something strange in the clearing where the orb had been. The ground was completely dry, forming a circular patch about 2 feet wide, while everything else around was damp from the night air. Pine needles and leaves nearby were slightly curled, as if they'd been heated, but without any burn marks. Juno, my dog, refused to enter the clearing. She followed me to the edge, her hackles raised and a low whine escaping her throat. She wouldn't go any closer. I stood there for a while, just observing, then backed off and returned to camp. That night was unsettling. I didn't build a fire or cook anything, just sat with Juno in the darkness, listening. Around midnight, a faint, low humming began, reminiscent of a distant power line. It wasn't constant, starting up for a few seconds before fading out. The sound came from the same direction as the clearing, but there was no wind. The trees were still, leaves motionless. I considered packing up and leaving, but decided to stay, mainly because hiking out in the dark seemed worse. I kept the rifle loaded, sitting with my back against the lean-to wall, watching the tree line. Around 2:15, Juno growled softly, a quiet warning from deep in her chest. Then the humming returned, louder this time. It seemed to be inside the trees, not behind or above them, difficult to describe. Nothing moved. No lights, no shadows, just the sound and Juno pressing against my leg. After about 10 minutes, the sound stopped abruptly. We left at first light. I didn't check the new SD card, not wanting to see what else it might have captured. I packed everything quickly, left the camera where it was, and hiked out as fast as possible without appearing to run. At home, I downloaded the original image and zoomed in, trying everything, adjusting contrast, checking metadata, running it through various apps. Nothing new appeared. Just a perfectly smooth, featureless glowing ball. I emailed the photo to my brother, a software engineer, typically skeptical about such things. He initially suggested a camera malfunction, but then asked about the dry spot and why the camera seemed to stop working. We pulled off the highway just past midnight, finding a small gravel turnout somewhere between Maple Ridge and Old Highway 22. The sky was a deep black you never see in the city, perfect for stargazing. Lisa had been driving for hours, so we stopped to stretch and look up. No streetlights around, just crickets and wind rustling through tall grass. Lisa parked and we got out with blankets. Henry, our golden retriever, bounded out, all lanky and awkward, sniffing everything like it was brand new. The air felt cool with a faint pine scent from nearby woods. We spread our blankets near the turnout's edge and lay back, rediscovering constellations we'd almost forgotten. Lisa's soft voice filled the quiet space. Henry curled up between us, snoring lightly. That's when I saw the light, high in the sky, bright and steady like a star or plane. But then it started moving differently, not in any normal pattern. It zigzagged with slow, deliberate arcs, making movements no airplane could manage. Sharp direction changes, completely silent. I nudged Lisa and pointed. She squinted, half smiling like I was joking. But the light kept moving, smooth, silent. We watched for maybe 5 minutes. It drifted left to right, then suddenly split into 5 separate points of light. Each was as bright as the original, spreading out almost like a choreographed dance. Then they vanished. No flash, no trail, just gone. The video feed cut out in the middle of the shot after that night. I haven't returned to that clearing, not even to retrieve the camera. It's probably still strapped to a birch tree, recording wind and trees like nothing happened. Sometimes I consider going back with equipment, multiple cameras, thermal imaging, but I don't, because whatever was out there that night, I'm certain it didn't want to be seen twice. Last September, I got a new Celestron Nexstar 6SE telescope. Nothing fancy, just a basic setup that let me explore the night sky. Lisa and I had been spending evenings out in the woods, watching the stars and enjoying the quiet. Henry, my dog, would usually curl up nearby, content to be out with us. That night started like any other. We were sitting, scanning the sky, when something strange happened. I blinked and realized I'd been holding my breath. Lisa whispered, "What the hell was that?" I had no idea. We sat up, a mix of disbelief and unease washing over us. Henry lifted his head, ears twitching, but remained still. After a few minutes of silence, I looked around. The woods were dark and still. No movement, no noise except for night insects. No headlights, no cars on the highway. I checked my phone, 12:42 a.m., hoping to find some online explanation or local news report. Nothing. Lisa wanted to keep watching, but an unsettling quiet began to creep in. We packed up and drove home. I kept scanning the sky during the drive. Occasional shooting stars or satellites passed, but nothing like what we'd seen. The next day, friends laughed it off as a drone or light show. But that night, a faint hum haunted me when I was alone. Not loud enough to be outside, more like a vibration just beneath the air's surface. I asked Lisa if she heard it, but she didn't. For a week, the humming persisted, mostly in quiet moments. I checked power lines, water pipes, nothing explained it. One evening, walking Henry out back, the dog suddenly froze. Staring into the woods, hackles raised, he growled low. I shone a flashlight into the darkness, but saw only trees and shadows. The following day, I returned to the turnout where we'd been sitting. The grass was crushed where we'd been, but something was off. The tire tracks looked different, narrower, closer together than I remembered. Lisa insisted it was the same spot, but the evidence disagreed. I started documenting everything strange: the mysterious light, the unexplained hum, Henry's weird behavior, the odd tire tracks. Nothing added up. Weeks later, we still talk about that night. The vanishing lights, the unheard hum, Henry's reluctance to go near the woods after dark. I don't know what we saw. All I know is it wasn't normal, and it's still out there, just beyond understanding, like a question with no answer. I've got this telescope I bought off a guy on Craigslist, and I set it up on the back deck to check out Jupiter and Saturn. I'm not super into astronomy, but I like looking up when the skies are clear. Living on the edge of town helps. There's not much light pollution, just farm fields and some woods. The first night I saw it, I thought it was a plane, low in the eastern sky, just above the treetops, with a soft, steady glow. No blinking like most planes, no movement like a satellite, just sitting there. I wouldn't have paid much attention, except after about a minute, it started moving, but not like anything I'd seen before. These were perfect little loops, like a corkscrew, tight spirals, but slow and smooth. You'd have to stare to even notice the movement. I kept watching, half expecting it to speed off or vanish, but it just kept spiraling. I tried tracking it with the telescope, but it was so subtle the auto-tracking didn't even register. I ended up using binoculars. Exactly 13 minutes. I didn't intentionally time it, just a coincidence. I happened to glance at my phone when it started and stopped. The moment it ended, the light just blinked out. Not dimmed, not faded, completely gone. Clear sky, no clouds, no haze. It didn't duck behind anything. At first I figured it might be a drone. The neighbor a few blocks over flies racing drones, so I thought maybe he'd rigged up some fancy LED setup. But it was way too high for any drone I'd ever seen, and completely silent. Even quiet drones have a slight buzz when they're close enough to see clearly. The next night I looked again. Same spot, same time. Nothing for a while. I thought maybe it was just a random occurrence. But then, precisely at 9:42 p.m. on September 11th, the glow returned. Same spiral, same speed. That's when I started taking notes. I'm not a journal guy, but I grabbed a pad and started documenting everything. Time of appearance, duration, movement direction, always consistent. 9:42 p.m. to 9:55 p.m. Eastern sky, tiny clockwise loops. Steady, never wobbling, never drifting, just that smooth spiral until it switched off like a light. After the fifth night, I stopped bringing out the telescope. I'd sit out with my dog Nora, a neurotic terrier mix who'd usually bark at nothing, but during those 13 minutes, she'd go completely still. Not tense, just quiet, like she was listening to something invisible. I tried documenting it multiple ways. My phone camera couldn't capture anything in the dim light. Even my DSLR on a tripod with a long exposure setting failed to register anything. But I could see it clearly. Through my binoculars, I could track its movement, like a pen drawing slow, looping circles across a black background. One night, I invited my skeptical buddy Clay over, intentionally not telling him what we were looking for. I just asked him to watch the eastern sky around 9:40. Right on schedule at 9:42, it appeared. Clay noticed immediately. "What's that?" he asked. I simply told him to keep watching. Nora lay completely motionless at our feet while we observed. After a few minutes, Clay leaned forward. "Is it moving?" he asked. I confirmed. We watched in silence until 9:55 when it suddenly vanished. "That's not a drone," Clay declared. I agreed. He suggested I contact local authorities or an astronomy club, but I hadn't. I wasn't sure what I expected them to say. I did email a local astronomy group about the phenomenon, but never received a response. Then everything changed. On October 4th, the light didn't appear. I waited an hour, but the sky remained empty. The next few nights were the same. Nora returned to her usual behavior, barking at bugs and chasing shadows. On October 7th, while doing dishes, the power flickered briefly. Immediately, Nora ran to the back door, whining, not barking, which was unusual. When I looked out the window, the light was back. But this time, it wasn't in the eastern sky. It hovered almost directly overhead, brighter and larger than before, no longer spiraling. I stepped outside to get a better look. The air felt different. Not polar, but heavy like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. My skin tingled. Nora refused to follow me outside, staying pressed against the doorframe and whining. When I looked up, the light remained motionless. I watched it for about a minute before it began drifting steadily southward. No spiraling, no pulsing, just a straight line, as if it had grown weary of its usual movement. I tracked it until it vanished beyond the tree line. This time, it didn't blink out, but smoothly slid away. It never returned. Since that night, I've been out every clear evening, occupying the same chair with my binoculars, staring at the same patch of sky. Sometimes Nora joins me, sometimes she doesn't. I've studied that empty space so intensely that I know every surrounding star by heart. Yet the moving light, its spirals, its 13-minute routine, nothing. It seemed to complete its purpose, or perhaps grew bored and departed. For 23 consecutive nights, this thing appeared with clockwork precision. Spirals, silence, then gone. Then it changed, then it left. Now the sky is mostly back to normal. I had just resumed jogging after months off due to a sprained ankle. Nothing extraordinary, walking my neighbor's dog, of all things. But on my third run back, something felt different. Late August, a little past 9 p.m. The Missouri heat lingered, sticky but not unbearable, cooling slightly after sunset. Millwood Park's trail wasn't anything special. A single paved path, scattered benches, a duck pond, and some swing sets with faded blue rubber flooring. One side bordered a residential neighborhood, the other a small woodland stretch. Typically quiet. I preferred running here after dark when almost no one was around, just occasional dog walkers or teenagers hanging out. That night, the trail was completely empty. I'd started with earbuds, but removed them during the first lap. Something about the stillness made me uneasy about blocking out surrounding sounds. Nothing felt explicitly wrong, just slightly off. Small, indefinable details seemed subtly different. I was running my usual route through the park, rounding the bend near the tennis courts when something felt off. The roads bordering the park were completely empty. No headlights, no parents picking up kids from practice, no late shift workers driving home. Just silence. The bug sounds caught my attention next. Cicadas, crickets, they were making noise, but not randomly. Their sounds were perfectly synchronized, like an endless audio loop playing through an invisible speaker. Everything repeated with eerie precision. I slowed down and looked around. The park seemed normal at first glance. Orange street lamps illuminated the trail, casting familiar shadows. The metal trash can near the basketball court was full, but not overflowing. The water fountain dripped steadily. Totally ordinary details. Yet something felt deeply unnatural. Nothing moved unless I moved. Shadows stretched in unnatural ways. The entire scene felt like a meticulously arranged tableau. During my second lap near the duck pond and heading toward the playground, the streetlights began their strange performance. First one flickered, then another, then the third, all precisely spaced about 30 feet apart. They pulsed in perfect synchronization, buzzing, dimming, brightening, going dark, then suddenly returning. I stopped running and checked my phone. 9:13 p.m. The rhythmic flickering seemed deliberate, not like a random electrical glitch from the recent thunderstorm. Something felt intentional about the pattern. After roughly 20 seconds, the lights went completely dead. Not just off, dead. No buzzing, no residual glow, just black poles against the darkness. Then absolute silence descended, instantaneously. No bugs, no rustling leaves, no distant traffic sounds. Total, complete quiet, as if something had sucked all sound from the horror environment. That's when I saw the light. The park was quiet, almost too quiet. A blinding white light hung suspended above the treetops, maybe 30 or 40 feet up, about 100 yards away. Something felt off immediately. Despite its intense brightness, so bright it was painful to look at directly, the light didn't cast any shadows. The trees beneath remained pitch black against the darker sky, as if the light couldn't or wouldn't touch them. I froze. My breathing became shallow, and I pulled my arms in close, trying to make myself smaller. Time seemed to stretch and warp. The light hung motionless for what might have been 30 seconds or longer. It was hard to tell when your brain is screaming that something isn't right. Then it moved. Not quickly, not slowly, but with an unnervingly smooth horizontal glide, tracking perfectly along the treetops like an object on an invisible rail. It passed behind a large oak and vanished. I waited, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, nothing. When I stepped forward, the gravel beneath my foot crunched loudly, shattering the silence. Suddenly, the light reappeared behind me. The street lights began flickering, out of sync, buzzing, flashing unpredictably. It felt like something was attempting to imitate light's behavior, but failing, like a distant observer trying to mimic something it had only watched from afar. I walked quickly toward the trail exit. The path curved, bringing me close to the woods again. I half expected to see the light hovering above the trees, but everything looked normal by the time I reached the sidewalk. Traffic sounds returned. Insects resumed their evening chorus. That night, I told no one, not my sister when she called the next day. I didn't even go running for 2 weeks. But the strangest part came the next morning. Around 6 a.m., I took Olive, my scruffy, bad-kneed mutt, for her usual walk, still unsettled by what I'd witnessed. We were hiking in the Oida Mountains of Arkansas, just after the first cold snap of the year. The trails were empty, and I'd taken a few days off work to clear my head. My plan was simple: 2 nights out solo, far enough from the usual paths to avoid crowds. Jasper, my wiry shelter dog, came with me. Quiet, good off-leash, and usually more alert than I am. We parked at the trailhead after lunch. The sky was cloudy, the air damp with the threat of rain that never came. A heavy, dull overcast made the woods feel tight and close. By late afternoon, we'd traveled about 5 miles to a familiar campsite, a flat spot above a creek, ringed by thick pines and young oaks. I set up camp, started a small fire, and heated some canned chili while Jasper explored the brush. That first night was cold. I woke several times, burrowing deeper into my sleeping bag. Coyotes howled around midnight, which wasn't unusual for these mountains. The next day passed without incident. We hiked a few more miles to a small ridge where I ate lunch and watched the tree line. The clouds thinned slightly but never fully cleared. Around 3 p.m., I decided to return to the previous night's campsite. We were about a mile out on a narrow trail when Jasper suddenly stopped. He didn't growl or bark, just stood completely still, ears pointed forward. Almost 6 months later, I still think about that moment. I run at night sometimes, but never near that park. The memory stays with me, that sudden, inexplicable stillness. I was out hiking with Jasper when something strange happened. The forest around us was quiet at first, just the usual background noise of birds and rustling leaves. But then a low, steady humming began. It wasn't like a typical plane sound that fades in and out. This was constant, almost mechanical, like an old generator running behind a distant wall. When I looked up, expecting to see an aircraft or drone, there was nothing except clouds and trees. But the trees themselves were moving in an odd way. Just the ones directly above us were swaying in a slow, deliberate circular motion. Each tree bent slightly at its top, creating a clear, synchronized movement. Strangely, there was no wind. The air was completely still. I even tested this by licking my finger and holding it up, but detected no air movement. The lower branches and undergrowth remained completely motionless. Jasper started whining softly, his tail tucked low, clearly sensing something was off. I tried to capture video on my phone, but the moment I opened the camera app, the humming abruptly stopped. The trees froze, as if someone had hit a pause button. Everything went back to normal, almost instantly. We continued hiking, and I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was some localized wind phenomenon or an unusual air pressure effect. But a nagging feeling persisted, like we weren't supposed to be there. That night at camp, I didn't build a fire. I ate a protein bar and sat in the tent